The morning sun spilled across the sprawling lawns of the Harrington estate, turning the dew into glittering beads of silver. It was the kind of place that made passersby stop and stare, an endless stretch of manicured grass, a fountain-shaped, like a marble swan, and a mansion that looked like it had been stolen from a fairy tale. Inside, everything smelled faintly of polished wood, expensive perfume, and the faint hum of money being quietly spent. Marcia Jones had been working there for almost 2 years, but the grandeur still left her a little breathless. Every morning, as she slipped on her crisp black uniform and tied her white apron, she would remind herself that she was here to do a job: clean the rooms, dust the shelves, make sure the floors shone so bright you could see your reflection in them. She had learned to move quietly, to keep her head down, to stay invisible in the background of this grand life she could never afford. But there was one thing she couldn't ignore: the boy. Nathaniel Harrington was 8 years old, the only son of Edward Harrington, a billionaire whose face regularly appeared in business magazines. Nathaniel was different. The doctors had used many words to describe him: autistic, developmentally delayed, socially withdrawn. Marcia didn't understand all the clinical terms, but she knew this. Nathaniel hardly spoke, rarely looked anyone in the eye, and preferred to spend his days alone in his big, light-filled playroom surrounded by puzzles and picture books. He never seemed to open. Most of the staff avoided him, not out of cruelty, but out of fear of doing something wrong. His father was protective, no, overly protective, and the rules were clear: only the governess. Ms. Clare was to handle anything related to Nathaniel's education or development. But Marcia had noticed something that no one else seemed to. See, it was on a Tuesday morning when she came to dust the bookshelves in the playroom. Nathaniel sat on the carpet, a small hardcover book in his lap. He wasn't reading, but his eyes followed the letters on the page as if they meant something to him. His tiny finger traced the words almost lovingly, and Marcia froze in the doorway, her feather duster suspended midair. "You like that one?" she asked softly. Nathaniel didn't respond, didn't even look at her, but he didn't push the book away either. That was a start. Over the next few weeks she began speaking to him in little bursts. Whenever she came in to clean, she'd point to the cover of a book and say, "This says The Little Red Hen." Sometimes she'd sound out the first word. She noticed that his eyes followed her lips, as if trying to capture the shape of each sound. One afternoon, while Ms. Clare was away at a doctor's appointment, and Marcia was tidying up, she took a risk. She sat down on the carpet across from Nathaniel, holding up a book with colorful bold letters. "This says cat," she told him, pointing. "Kata, cat." Nathaniel blinked. Then, almost imperceptibly, his lips moved. "Cat," he whispered. It was so soft, she thought she'd imagined it. But then he said it again, a little louder this time, as if testing the sound. From that day on, Marcia began to teach him in secret. She didn't have formal training. She wasn't a teacher, but she had patience, and maybe that was what Nathaniel needed most. Every day, while the rest of the household bustled around them, she carved out 15, 20, sometimes 30 minutes to sit with him. They started with simple words: dog, sun, ball, hat. She would say the word, point to the letters, and then encourage him to repeat it. At first, Nathaniel's voice was barely a whisper, his eyes darting nervously toward the door as if afraid of being caught. But as the weeks turned into months, something began to change. His words grew clearer, his eyes lingered longer on the pages, and one day, he even smiled. Marcia treasured those moments like precious gems, but they had to be careful. If Mr. Harrington found out, he might see it as interference. He paid a small fortune for Miss Clare's services, and the last thing Marcia wanted was to lose her job. So whenever footsteps approached, she would slide the book back onto the shelf and start dusting, as if nothing had happened. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Saturday afternoon in late spring. The mansion was alive with the sound of guests. Mr. Harrington was hosting a business gathering, and the house was filled with people in tailored suits and sparkling dresses. Nathaniel was, as usual, in his playroom. Marcia had been planning to sneak in for their usual reading time when she heard voices outside the door. Mr. Harrington and a group of guests had decided to say hello to Nathaniel. It was rare for him to be introduced to anyone, but his father wanted to show that his son was doing well. When they entered, Nathaniel was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, a book open in his lap. One of the guests, a tall man with kind eyes, crouched down beside him. "What's that you've got there, buddy?" the man asked. Nathaniel hesitated. His eyes flicked toward Marcia, who was standing in the corner, her heart pounding. And then slowly, deliberately, he began to read. Once upon a time. His voice was clear, steady, word by word. He made his way through the first page, his small finger following the lines. The room went silent. Mr. Harrington's jaw dropped. One of the women covered her mouth with her hand. The tall man's eyes lit up. Double quotes, Nathaniel? That's amazing. He said. Mr. Harrington was staring at his son, as if seeing him for the first time. Claire said he wasn't ready for this, he murmured. She said maybe in another year. Nathaniel looked up at him, and for the first time in years, their eyes met. Read. With Marcia, he said simply. The room turned toward her. For a moment no one spoke. Marcia's heart thudded in her chest. She opened her mouth to explain, to apologize, but before she could say anything, Mr. Harrington crossed the room. You taught him. Marcia swallowed hard. I just showed him some words. He was curious. I thought it might help. Instead of anger, something unexpected appeared on Mr. Harrington's face. Gratitude. His voice was thick when he spoke. You did more than help. You gave him something I thought he'd never have. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Nathaniel's progress astonished everyone, even his doctors. Mr. Harrington insisted that Marcia be officially involved in his son's education. Working alongside Ms. Claire, her pay increased. Her working hours became more flexible. She no longer had to hide the little reading sessions that had once been their secret. But more than that, something deeper had shifted. Nathaniel began, speaking more short sentences at first, then longer ones. He started asking questions, pointing to things and wanting to know their names. Books became his constant companions, and every time he read a new one, he would run to Marcia to share it with her, and every time he did, she thought back to that first whispered cat on the carpeted floor and how a single moment of patience had grown into something no one could have predicted. She had come to this mansion to scrub floors and dust shelves. She had stayed to help a boy find his voice, and in the end, it was his voice, soft, steady, full of new words that would be the most beautiful thing she had ever heard.